Welcome back to our next edition of the CB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined as always by my co-host, Ben Anderson. And today we are also joined by our CB Review's own Mat Mlodzinski. And we are now doing part 4 of our 6-part series recapping this transfer portal offseason in college basketball. So we've done the ACC, we've done the Big Ten, we've done the Big 12, and today we're going to do the Big East. So we're going to talk about some of the teams that we designated as winners in this transfer portal cycle, some of the teams that we designated as losers, and we will end it by giving our all Big East transfer portal team. So before we get into our winners and losers, I'll just throw it to you guys. Just overall thoughts, like I always start on, in this case, the Big East.
Matt, you're the Big East expert. I'll let you take it over.
Yeah, for me, it's just I feel like I was here for the ACC, obviously, a few weeks ago. And in the ACC, we kind of all agreed that there weren't many great transfers at that time, but there were a lot of good transfers. In the Big East, I feel like there are a few transfers that stand out, but then after that, it dips down way low. I have a feeling that when we get to our all Big East transfer teams, we're going to have a lot of the same players. I could be wrong, but that's just kind of the consensus I got to. And a couple of teams haven't really utilized the transfer portal that much. So it's interesting there too. But I still think that there's enough names that some transfers could make some big waves in the Big East next season.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of very intriguing teams. You have basically polar opposites, one being St. John's, one being Marquette, where you either have entire teams that are built of the transfer portal or you have coaches that refuse to take a single player. So you definitely have the entire gamut in the Big East. And I'm interested to see who you guys picked as your winners and losers, because I think you could go a lot of different ways.
Yeah, so that transitions us into perfectly what my winner will be, and that is St. John's, which, Ben, you said it. Their entire team has just been replaced by an entirely new team. Obviously, with the coaching change and Rick Pitino and all that, that's very exciting for St. John's. And we'll start with the additions. We'll start with Jordan Dingle coming from Penn. He was the second leading scorer in the country last year at 23.4 points per game, just behind Anton Davis. And he's returning now, stepping up to a much higher level from the Ivy League to the Big East. I don't think he's going to average 23.4, but he'll definitely be a very significant player. And he should have multiple years of eligibility, good defender. So that was a great addition. Also, a couple of Iona transfers, including Jenkins, Denise Jenkins, who averaged 15.6 points in his first year as a JUCO transfer. Just another guy like Dingle, just a great scorer, but also really good defensively. And I think that's really important, especially for a team with their first year under a new coach and new system. You got a lean from UConn, a good specialist off the bench. You got Zubia Ejiofor from Kansas, who's recently a top 100 recruit. Glenn Taylor Jr. from Oregon State, double-digit scorer last year at Oregon State. You got R.J. Luis coming over from my Massachusetts Minutemen, who averaged 11.5 points per game last year, but that's a deceiving 11.5 because for whatever reason, he just did not get the playing time he deserved in the first half of the year. And then the second half of the year, he just started to take over games. So I think he's a very legitimate Big East starting level, second team, third team, all conference player type guy. We get to the departures, which there's a lot, especially in quantity, but I think the big standout is AJ Storr, who we talked about in our Big Ten episode. Ben, you talked about him a lot. That's going to be a big loss, similar to Ejiofor coming from Kansas. He's a former top 100 recruit. He had a decent freshman season. They're also losing what would have been their leading returning scorer in David Jones. So that's a lot coming in, a lot coming out. What do I make of this? That's really the question here. And Rick Pitino, I think, brings in a new squad basically their entire starting five, basically their entire rotation he's bringing in. And I think that roster right there is capable of not only competing right away, but am I crazy to say that just this transfer class has transcended this roster into one of the better rosters in the Big East?
Yeah, I do.
You
I do
do?
think you're crazy. I think that's a little bit high. Although Rick Pitino's a great coach, I worry a tiny bit about how this team exactly is going to fit together. I don't love the wing positions that much, so I'd like to see it before it happens. But I do like a few of the rosters in the conference over St. John's at this point, but they could mesh together at the end of the year.
No, I said better rosters. I didn't say I'm going to pick them to finish top 5 in the conference in the first year.
Sure.
But either of you could take away your winner next.
Yeah, I can go and just quick on your St. John's. I do think that it's a team that can finish in the top half of the Big East, but I feel like that also revolves around Rick Pitino's coaching. Like, I think he'll elevate these transfers from what they were, and some of these guys were already good. I mean, Naheem Aline is literally a champion, and Jordan Dingle can score with anyone in the country. So, they're already great players, but he's going to elevate them even more. I went to Xavier for my winner, a team that brings in a couple transfers, loses a couple transfers. I feel like right off the bat, I'll start with the departures. I don't think they really lost anything too major. None of these guys, although some of them were part of the rotation a bit last year, they weren't like major parts of the rotation. So Xavier, besides players that they lose because of eligibility, they're not losing any, key transfer departures. But the biggest thing for me is that these additions, especially Davion McKnight and Quincy Oliveri, are going to be able to play with Zach Freemantle. Like, the pressure isn't going to be on the transfers to be the biggest part of this Musketeers team. Zach Freemantle proved last year that he can be what people thought he could be. His freshman year was fantastic, and Xavier kind of went down a little bit after that. And then last year, he was one of the best players in the Big East. I think that he's going to be back, even though he had that foot injury. Shouldn't be too serious. And I think that Davion McKnight is going to be a guy that could kind of be what Sule Boom was last year for Xavier. I think Quincy Oliveri can add some scoring to a team that on paper looks like it's going to be one of the better scoring teams in the Big East. Logan Duncombe, not so sure. He obviously might have to earn some more playing time. I think it's a really talented roster. And then Abu Usman from North Texas. Hopefully I'm pronouncing these names right. I think that, as a 6'10 guy, 250 pounds, he will have no trouble rebounding in the Big East. So Xavier from top to bottom brings in guys that I think are going to fit well alongside Zach Freemantle and the rest of that roster. And I think Sean Miller, again, has a top 3 team in the Big East.
Yeah, I like these additions as well, but for me, my winner, it's all about keeping things simple. And in this sense, Kyle Neptune did a really good job with this Villanova transfer class. I think he addressed needs that were prevalent during his first year, which obviously everyone knows was a bit rough. And he didn't lose basically anyone. Angelo Brizzi transferred to Davidson, but he didn't really play during his first year in Villanova. What they did bring in, though, was size. And this is something that Villanova has been struggling with basically since Omari Spellman left, is they don't really have a guy up front who can take on some of the bigger roles in the Big East. And with Hakeem Hart in particular, they have a wing defender that I don't think they really have had before. He's 6'7", 6'8", can really guard some forwards, which I think is what Villanova has struggled with in the past. They've run these 4-guard lineups where all 4 of them are under 6'5" or shorter, and it's come back to bite them a little bit. And then Lance Ware as well. You've seen some players come out of Kentucky, find a different home, and succeed after that. It's not as much of a pressure cooker as it is down in Lexington, and I do think Lance Ware has a solid ability to be a good backup big in the Big East. And I think that's what Villanova will ask him to do. And then TJ Bamba averages nearly 16 points a game last year, sort of a microwave scorer in sort of the Caleb Daniels mold, if you want to say that. Daniels is leaving, Bamba's coming in. I think he'll provide some scoring punch to a Villanova offense that should be really good next year. I just like what Kyle Neptune again did with the entire roster. He found spots that he needed, and he found players that fit. So I think he did a good job in it going into his second year.
Fair enough. Yeah, simple but effective is definitely a good way to put it. They added at places that they needed to address, and they definitely improved. It's not a complete overturn of their roster, and that's probably for the better in year 2 of a coach. So we did our winners. Now moving on to some of the losers in the Big East. And this one I feel like might be a little bit controversial, and I'll explain, but Creighton I actually had as a loser. So Creighton is honestly near, like if you're putting this on a scale from 0 being the utmost transfer portal loser to 10 being the utmost transfer portal winner, they're probably looming around a 5. But I think they're slightly less than 5, slightly more towards the losing end than the winning end. And for a team like Creighton, I think you wanted to particularly improve your roster and build off of what was already a successful season, and they weren't able to do so. So let me explain a little more, diving into the players. So who did they lose? Most significantly, they lost Ryan Nembhard to Gonzaga, going where his brother used to play point guard, and he's going to be he averaged 12.1 points per game and almost 5 assists per game last year. So that's a significant loss. Also, Arthur Kaluma. He will be transferring, well, we're not sure yet, but a big who was a big presence inside, averaged around 12 points per game, 6 rebounds. Now, they did compensate this by adding a very good combo guard in Stephen Ashworth coming from Utah State, who averaged 16.2 points per game and very, very efficient, one of the best three-point shooting players in the country. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you could say that cancels out, but then I don't think Isaac Trout is quite ready to play a gigantic role yet, at least not necessarily. And that was the big power forward that they added from Virginia. He was a top 100 recruit last year. A lot of potential, but he redshirted last year. It's kind of a little bit, I don't know. It makes me feel like I'm not sure he steps right in and becomes a double-digit scorer right away, even though he has a lot of potential. Great shooter for his size. But, again, I don't think that necessarily compensates for that loss. And then I just look at this roster as a whole, because you got Kalkbrenner, who was your leading scorer last year. You got Alexander. They're both in the NBA draft right now. We don't know whether they're coming back. I don't know if you guys have any more insight than I do, but we're not sure, right? We have no idea. Okay. So we're on the same page there. Baylor Shireman is returning. So really the outlook of the Creighton roster next year is unknown, but Nembhard and Kaluma were two guys you really expected to come back, take another leap forward, and make this team even better. While they got viable replacements for those guys, I think overall it's a net loss. So like I said, on that scale of 0 to 10, I think it's like a 4 or 4.5, leaning slightly towards the losers. And potentially not as much of a loser as some of the losers I had for the other conferences, but I didn't think there were so many Big East teams that I had to absolutely, put on this losing end of the scale. And I think you guys took the other two obvious choices, so I'll let you guys get into yours.
Yeah, I can take it next, but I want to agree with you here. Like, it's funny, like I feel like Stephen Ashworth pops off the page and you're like, okay, that's a very good pickup for Creighton. But when you look at who they lost, I mean, like you mentioned, they're losing athleticism, they're losing depth, guys that can guard multiple positions, and they're replacing it with kind of guys that are talented but maybe can only do one thing really good and then other things so. And I feel like because of that, I mean, Creighton, they definitely are a loser. So it's a tricky loser because I feel like people would be tempted to say, no, they're fine, but good pick there. I went with Marquette, another Midwest team. So clearly we're not fans of the Midwest teams in the transfer portal out of the Big East. Key additions, none. And that's the big thing for me. Did they lose anything really big? No, not at all. Marquette's going to be fine. They're going to be a top team next year. But let's not forget that Marquette lost in the round of 32 last year to Michigan State. I know that it's going to be likely the same roster. Guys will improve. The biggest thing for me, and I think you've seen this over the years, teams that have won national championships, is they have kind of like a common ground of players from one year to the next. There's some type of cohesion that they're able to have. You saw it with Villanova over the years. You saw it with UConn last year. It was a team that had a good chunk of the players that did the year before. They were able to grow with each other. You're going to get that with Marquette. So this team is going to be fine. But when you lose in the round of 32, you do still need to improve because it doesn't speak, okay, this team is automatically going to the Final Four. I think to me it speaks this team should win 25-plus games and be a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. I would have really liked Shaka Smart to go out there, maybe get a senior point guard to back up Tyler Kolek out there. Maybe get another big man. I know that might not be what Marquette is kind of going for, but I think it helps, especially in a physical conference like the Big East and when you get to March. Maybe even get one more shooter off the bench. Something to help out this team a little bit, especially just like a senior that's been around the block, that knows what the deal is, that can help out come March time. Marquette hasn't done that. Obviously, things could change. And if they do get anyone, like a 10-point-per-game scorer out of Conference USA that should be able to translate to the Big East and play 15 minutes a game, anything. I just don't like how it is the same exact team as last year. Obviously, you bring in an incoming recruiting class, that can change things. But from top to bottom, it's largely the same Marquette team. And I just don't feel comfortable about that if I'm a Golden Eagles fan. I think you want to see something you can kind of look to and say, okay, this can improve us. And right now you're kind of just relying on your own guys getting better.
Yeah, I think you talk about championship teams and teams that go to the Final Four and are successful in March. Yes, they have continuity from one year to the other. Also, in a vast majority of examples I could think of, they have transfers that come in and aren't necessarily the stars of the show, but play key significant roles. Like your transfers are role players that fit very specific needs. And like you said, Marquette got 0 of that.
Yeah, exactly. UConn last year, Joey Calcaterra or Naheem Aline. Like these guys are coming in and they're not their leading scorers. They're not their third leading scorer, but that might be what pushes you over the top. I like this pick for you, Matt. And then for mine, I know it's going to hit a little close to Matt's home as an alumnus, but I did have to go with the Seton Hall Pirates here. I'm just a little concerned. I'm a little concerned on what's going on over there in New Jersey. I don't love who they added. And that's really the main thing. It's not so much that they lost these mega players. Like Tyrese Samuel's a good guy, a good pickup for Florida. Trey Jackson will do some stuff at Michigan, and Femi Odukale averaged 8 points, something like that. And so like these are definitely role players that they lost and they could have used in a significant overall in a significant manner next season. But they're not adding things, right? Dylan Adewusu coming in from St. John's, like that's a good pickup, but it's not going to wow me. Elijah Hutchins Everett averaged 11 and 5 as a big man on a terrible Austin Peay team. Like they were real bad. And then Jaden Bediako, it's just not moving the needle. And that's what I worry about, right? You have Kadari Richmond, you have a couple other pieces, but you're not building around it in order to make a roster that's competitive in the Big East. And I think they're going to find themselves sort of, in that 8th, 9th range, maybe yet again this year. So I'd have loved to see a step forward for Shaheen Holloway, but you can't win in this transfer portal every single year, and it's not a great start off to it. And like Dan said before, not a lot of losers in the Big East, so maybe we're being a little bit harsh, but that's sort of where I'm at with the Pirates here.
Ben, I'm upset, but I do give you the seal of approval. It's a good pick. I mean, Dylan Adewusu might have been, if he was the second or best transfer coming in for Seton Hall, it'd be a different story. I think he'll be good, but like you mentioned, just losing too much and not bringing in enough. So good job, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have to agree with both of you. So to end off these shows, we always end with our all-conference transferred in teams. So 5 players, the best 5 that transferred into the Big East in this case. And I'll start with mine. And we mentioned, I believe, 4 out of 5 of these, so I'm not going to go into depth about all of these players, but I'm going to go kind of a 3-guard lineup here. Stephen Ashworth coming from Utah State over to Creighton. I have also 2 Villanova guys. The first guy being TJ Bamba coming from Wazoo over to Villanova. I really like his catch and shoot ability, and that's really valuable for Villanova's offense. That's kind of their staple right there. Jordan Dingle, Penn over to St. John's. I talked about him in my St. John's segment. And then my other Villanova guy is Hakeem Hart coming over from Maryland. And this is the guy we have not talked about who will be the center for my all Big East transfer team. And that is Josh Oduro coming over. You knew I was going to say that?
No, it's my 5. It's my 5.
Oh, it's your – okay.
Yeah.
Coming over from George Mason in the A-10 to Providence. He averaged over 15 points per game in each of his 2 seasons. I think I watched him a lot in the A-10, and his offense will translate over to the Big East. I'm not sure he's a plus defender at that level, but I think his offense is good enough to be a big impact player for Providence.
Yeah, since you said the same 5, I'll go ahead and add on. There's not a lot of big men, I noticed, in the Big East and from the transfer portal. So you're sort of picking at straws here, but Oduro is a really good pick. I like what he can bring to the table for the Friars. And he has experience, obviously, with Kim English coming from George Mason as well. And you've touched on everyone else. I just think that the offensive ability of the transfers in the Big East is much more important than the defensive aptitude. So really, you're going to have your all Big East team is going to score 80 on anyone on any given night.
That's funny. I'll second a couple of your guys, a couple of the guys we talked about for mine. I mean, Jordan Dingle, like we mentioned, he will score. It doesn't matter what conference he's in, especially in the Big East. Stephen Ashworth should do the same at Creighton, even though, like you mentioned, Creighton might be a loser in the portal. Ashworth was a plus, and TJ Bamba, again, will fit in well with Kyle Neptune and Villanova. I do have Davion McKnight on mine. I was high on Xavier. He's the reason why, so I have to keep him on. The one guy I had different, Posh Alexander, coming over from St. John's to Butler. Might not be that sexy of a move because I don't know if Butler's going to be that great this year, but Posh Alexander's been pretty good. He kind of fell off a little bit last year, so I'm wondering if maybe the change of scenery could kind of get the Posh Alexander we all expected to see last year, which hopefully is a guy that, could make the first all Big East first team. You never know. I think that was kind of his ceiling. It's dropped down a bit. Maybe Thad Matta can get that out of him.
Bomb going to play the 5 on your team?
I know. I was going to say, I picked all guards. I did not go for a big man. These were my 5 best.
I'm unique. I feel like I'm more of the exception than the rule in terms of my philosophy that these teams have to be realistic products on the court, but I don't know. But that will do it for today's edition of the CVB Review Studio podcast. Be sure to like this episode if you are watching on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe here on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. This is part 4 of the transfer portal recap. So we got the SEC and the Pac-12 ahead of us. Those will be coming out in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for that. Once again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and take care.